one envelope, one condition, $3 million. I said yes, before I knew who it was meant for. But the real legacy was the secret he buried with my name. I was brushing my teeth when I found out I had inherited nearly $3 million from someone I barely remembered. No joke. I had one foot on the bathroom tile, the other half stepping into yesterday's jeans, toothpaste still foaming in my mouth, when the letter slid through the mail slot like it was just another coupon flyer. That morning had started like any other. My upstairs neighbor was stomping around like he was training for a wrestling match, and I was trying to scrape together enough focus to check my job apps before the soul-crushing wave of rejection emails came rolling in. Then I saw it. Heavy cream envelope, real wax seal like something out of a movie. My name, printed in those perfect, professional letters, Matthew Kane. I thought maybe it was spam. Some rich uncle in Nigeria type scam. But it was not. It was from a law office in upstate New York. Apparently, a man named Bernard Kane had passed away. The name meant nothing to me at first, until I remembered an old photo my mom used to keep in a drawer she thought I never snooped through. A guy in a wheelchair, older, kind of stern-looking, sitting next to my grandfather. That was Bernard, I guessed. My grandfather's brother or cousin or something. A man I never met. Or maybe I had, but it did not stick. Anyway, the letter said I was the sole heir to Bernard's estate. Nearly $3 million in cash and investments. But, of course, there was a condition. That is where things started getting weird. The inheritance would only be released if I fulfilled one specific clause in the will. Not optional. Not flexible. Required. The letter did not spell it out, just said I needed to appear at the law office in person, where the full terms would be explained. Now, you need to understand something. I am not some trust fund kid. I rent a 2-bedroom apartment I can barely afford, drive a car that squeals when it turns left, and recently got ghosted by a company I had a second interview with. So yeah, $3 million? That kind of money would change my entire life. Still, part of me hesitated. Something about the vagueness of it. The way the letter danced around the details made my stomach twist. But then I opened my banking app. $38.12. And rent was due in 6 days. I knew I had no choice. So, 3 days later, I boarded a bus to a town I had never heard of, dressed in my second-best button-up shirt and trying not to sweat through the armpits. I sat across from an old guy who smelled like Vicks and hot dogs, holding a tattered copy of Moby Dick. He looked up once and said, "You look like someone heading for trouble." He was not wrong. When I stepped off the bus in Ravenwood, New York, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Like the whole town was holding its breath. And then I saw her, waiting outside the law office like she knew I would show up. A woman I had never seen before, holding a manila folder close to her chest. She looked me dead in the eye and said something I still have not forgotten. "You really have no idea what he is asking you to do you?" The woman's name was Mallory Green. Tall, sharp features, blazer too expensive for a town this size. She introduced herself as Bernard's estate lawyer, though she looked more like someone who carried secrets for a living. Her tone was dry, efficient, and not especially friendly. We walked into the office. Old wood floors, dust in the corners. Everything smelled like books that had been closed too long. She led me down a narrow hallway and into a room with a heavy door and thick curtains drawn tight against the daylight. There was a single envelope sitting on the table. My name, written in the same perfect font from the letter. Mallory sat down across from me, clasped her hands, and said, "Before you open it, you need to understand, your Uncle Bernard was not a normal man. He had a complicated sense of morality. This clause is specific." I asked her what that meant, but she just nodded toward the envelope. So I opened it. Inside was a single typed sheet. To receive the inheritance, you must personally deliver a sealed envelope to a man named Victor Reese. You are not allowed to open the envelope, ask questions about it, or discuss the delivery with anyone, not even Reese himself. Once the envelope is in his hands, the funds will be transferred within 72 hours. It sounded simple. Too simple. I asked her what the catch was. She looked uncomfortable for the first time. "We are legally obligated not to open the envelope." Bernard was firm about that. I asked about this Victor guy. She hesitated, then pulled out a separate folder and slid it toward me. Inside was a photo, grainy, zoomed in, probably taken from a distance. A man in his 60s, silver beard, thick glasses, walking into what looked like a recovery clinic. Then I saw the note scribbled in the margin. Former pastor. Disgraced. Charges dropped. I looked up at Mallory. What kind of charges? She did not answer. Instead, she said, if you do not want to proceed, you are free to walk away. But the thing was, I could not walk away. Not just because of the money, but because something deeper had started digging under my skin. Why me? Why this? Why deliver a message to a man who had clearly spent his life trying to disappear? I asked Mallory why Bernard would want this done after death. She gave me a long look, then said, that man ruined your uncle's life. I just stared at her. So this is revenge? I do not know, she said. But I know Bernard spent his last 20 years in silence. No phone. No visitors. Only writing letters. Most of them to Victor, never sent. I picked up the envelope that was meant for Victor. It was sealed in red wax. No name. No return address. Something about it felt wrong. Like it was pulsing with a kind of weight that had nothing to do with paper. I almost said no right then and there. But then I saw the back of the envelope. 3 initials, carved into the wax. M.C. My own. Wait, I said. This envelope was meant to be delivered by me? Mallory just nodded. Then she said the one thing that made my hands go cold. Your name was not always Matthew Kane, was it? Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. My brain stalled for a second, like it needed time to process what she just said. What do you mean? My name has always been Matthew Kane. Mallory gave me a look that made my stomach twist. The kind of look people give when they know something you do not, and wish they didn't have to say it. Bernard Kane was not just your uncle. He was your legal guardian. For a short time, after your parents died. Your name was changed when you were 5. You were adopted, technically readopted, into the Kane side of the family after a custody battle. I sat there, blinking, the envelope heavy in my hands. I had flashes of memory, things that had never fully made sense. A photo album I once found in my mother's closet, filled with pictures of a little boy with blonde hair and a different last name written on the back. Letters I was never allowed to read. A lawyer's number scratched out on a sticky note taped inside a box of keepsakes. My mother, who raised me after age 6, always shut down questions about those early years. I asked Mallory what my name used to be. She said it quietly. Michael Langston. It felt like hearing someone else's story. Michael Langston. I repeated the name in my head. It meant nothing. No emotion. No recognition. But it shook something loose, like a hidden drawer in my mind cracking open for the first time in decades. So, who were my real parents? She handed me another folder. This one was thicker. I opened it and immediately saw the headlines. Langston family tragedy, pastor resigns after abuse allegations. There it was. The same man from the photo, Victor Reese. Listed as a family friend. Trusted spiritual advisor to the Langstons. It got worse from there. The file was full of scanned documents. Police reports, psychological evaluations, custody filings. I skimmed, trying not to drown in it all. It was like staring into a whirlpool, knowing it was about to pull me under. Victor had not just known my family. He had been inside our home. Almost daily. The reports were vague, but one thing became clear. Something had happened between him and my mother. Something damaging. Something my father tried to expose before he died in what the report called a suspicious accident. After that, Bernard Kane had stepped in and taken me away. He had tried to raise me quietly. Changed my name. Moved me across the country. Wiped the past clean. And now, with one sealed envelope, he was dragging it all back up. You still want me to deliver this? I asked, barely able to get the words out. Mallory nodded. That is what Bernard wanted. And if you choose to walk away, the money goes to a private foundation. But if you deliver it, you will get everything. The silence stretched between us. And in it, one thought kept echoing in my head. What if Bernard did not want justice? What if this was about revenge? I slid the envelope into my coat pocket, stood up, and turned to the door. But before I could leave, Mallory said one last thing. There is something else I need to show you. Something Bernard left only for you. I turned slowly. She reached into a locked drawer and pulled out an old cassette tape. The label was handwritten. Play only after the delivery. I left the office with the envelope in my coat and the cassette in my hand, feeling like I was carrying explosives and had no idea which wire not to cut. It was cold outside. That dry kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there. Ravenwood looked like every small American town I had ever passed through without a second thought. Brick storefronts, an old diner with flickering neon, a few kids smoking near a closed gas station. But that afternoon, it felt different. Like everything had shifted just slightly off center. I sat on a bench near the courthouse, cassette still in my hand. It was heavier than it should have been, like Bernard had poured every ounce of what he could not say into that tiny spool of tape. I had not seen a cassette in years. I did not even know where I could play it. Mallory was clear, though, after the delivery. Not before. But it ate at me. The not knowing. The why. I kept going over the details in my head. My name, my past, Victor Reese. The idea that I had once been part of a story that ended in grief and silence. And then there was Bernard, a man I barely remembered, now shaping the next chapter of my life from beyond the grave. Why had he chosen this? Why wait until after death to confront it? Was the envelope a message? A threat? A confession? My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my landlord again. Second time this week. Probably wondering where the rent was. I ignored it. Instead, I opened Google Maps and typed in the address Mallory gave me. Victor Reese lived just 3 hours away, in a place called Stone Hollow. A rehab town. Small, tucked into the mountains, mostly forgotten. It sounded like the kind of place where people go to be left alone. I booked a cheap motel room for the night and planned to drive out the next morning. I figured I needed time. Time to clear my head. Time to figure out if I even wanted to go through with it. Back at the motel, I stared at the cassette for hours. I flipped it over in my hand again and again. The label was faded, the handwriting shaky. Not printed. Not typed. Just scrawled in black ink. Matthew, you deserve to know. I had to fight every instinct in my body not to play it. Every fiber of me wanted answers now. But I tucked it deep into my backpack and forced myself to focus on the plan. Deliver the envelope. Walk away. Get the money. Simple. Except it wasn't. That night, I barely slept. I kept picturing the envelope catching fire in my coat. I kept hearing Bernard's voice in my head, though I could not even remember what he sounded like. I saw flashes of Victor's face from that grainy photo, his eyes dull and distant. I imagined what it would feel like to hand him this mysterious message, to lock eyes with a man who might have destroyed everything I never knew I lost. And just before sunrise, I made a decision. I would deliver it. But I was not going alone. I picked up my phone and called someone I had not spoken to in 6 years. Hey, I said, heart pounding. It's Matt. I need a favor. And I need you not to ask too many questions. There was silence on the other end. Then a tired voice answered. You still know how to find me? I nodded, even though he could not see. Yeah, I said. And I'm on my way. His name was Drew Mercer. We used to be close. Not best friend close, not share every feeling close. But he was the one person I could count on when everything else in my life started sliding sideways. We met in community college, back when I still thought I was going to be a history teacher. He worked nights at a loading dock, showed up to class half awake, and somehow still nailed every test. We clicked during a group project about civil wars. Ironic, looking back now. Drew was the guy who saw through the act. When I was putting on that calm, got it all together face, he would call me out with just one look. We lost touch after I dropped out. I got swallowed by bills, dead-end jobs, and a relationship that ended with me sleeping in my car for 3 weeks. Drew moved to his small cabin outside Ridge Point, grew a beard, and stopped answering social media messages. But I never forgot the road to his place. And apparently, he never changed his number. I found him sitting on the porch, boots kicked up on an old milk crate, sipping black coffee like he had been waiting. He looked rougher than I remembered, gray in his stubble, bags under his eyes. But when he saw me, he just nodded once, like this was normal. I figured you would show up one day, he said. I told him everything. Not all at once, but enough to get the shape of it. Bernard, the inheritance, Victor Reese, the sealed envelope. I left out some of the heavier details, mostly because I did not fully understand them yet. But Drew listened. He always had this way of staying quiet without making you feel judged. When I got to the part about my name, Michael Langston, he sat forward. Langston, he asked, slowly. You never told me that. I didn't know, I said. At least, I don't think I did. He stared out at the trees for a long moment. My mom used to go to a church out in Ashridge, he said. There was a guy there. Pastor Victor. She stopped going after something happened. She never talked about it, but I remember the name. Reese. Hearing it out loud again made my stomach turn. We sat in silence, the wind rustling through brittle autumn leaves. I told him I was supposed to deliver the envelope the next day. That the inheritance depended on it. That Bernard had left me a cassette I was not supposed to play until afterward. Drew looked at me and said, And what if delivering it is exactly what he wants? What if you're finishing something you were never supposed to start? I had no answer. That afternoon, we packed a duffel bag and fueled up Drew's old truck. I could have gone alone, but some part of me, maybe the part still named Michael, did not want to face Reese without someone at my back. We hit the road just before sunset. Stone Hollow was 3 hours north, middle of nowhere. Forest on all sides. 2 hours in, the GPS cut out. 30 minutes later, we hit fog so thick you could not see 10 feet ahead. And then, just past a crumbling roadside diner that looked long abandoned, we saw the sign. Stone Hollow Rehabilitation Center, private property, do not enter. Drew slowed the truck. I stared at the gate, heart hammering. And that was when I saw him. Victor Reese, standing at the tree line, watching us. Victor Reese stood there like he had been waiting all night. He looked older than the photo. Thinner, sunken eyes, hands shaking slightly. He wore a coat that looked one size too big, like it had once belonged to someone stronger. The way he watched us gave me a chill. Not fear exactly, but something colder. Recognition, maybe. Like he already knew who I was before I even stepped out of the truck. I froze with my hand on the door handle. Drew leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. "That him?" he asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The man turned and disappeared into the trees without a word. I opened the door and stepped out. The air smelled like wet pine and rust. We followed the trail on foot, flashlight beams slicing through the fog. Branches cracked under our boots, and every few steps I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. After 10 minutes, we came to a clearing with a single structure at the far edge. A rundown cabin, tucked behind a row of dead trees. The porch light flickered weakly. The front door was cracked open. I knocked once. No answer. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The place was dim, cluttered with papers, old books, newspaper clippings pinned to corkboards. A single chair faced the fireplace. And there he was, Victor Reese, sitting with his hands folded in his lap, like a man waiting for a verdict. "You are him," he said. "I wondered if you would come." His voice was softer than I expected. Not warm, not cold, just tired. "I have something for you," I said. I pulled the sealed envelope from my coat. My fingers shook. I walked toward him slowly, part of me wanting to throw it in the fire and walk away. Instead, I held it out. He looked at it, but did not reach for it. "You do not know what that is, do you?" he asked. "No," I said, "and I don't care." "That is a lie," he replied. Something about the way he said it, flat, matter of fact, made me want to hit him. But I kept my hand steady. He finally took the envelope and stared at it. For a moment, I thought he was going to open it, but he just held it close to his chest and said, "He kept his promise." I did not understand. None of this made sense. I asked him what Bernard meant by all this, why he wanted this delivered. Victor looked up at me, and I swear there was something broken behind his eyes. Because I told him the truth once, and it ruined him. I stepped back. What truth? He stood up slowly and walked to the fireplace. He did not burn the letter. He placed it on the mantel like it was sacred. Then he turned and said, "I never hurt your family, Michael. But your father thought I did." I felt the floor shift beneath me. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "You were investigated. You left the church." I left because I was scared," he said. "Scared of what your father would do when he realized the real secret." He walked to a drawer, pulled out an old photo, and handed it to me. It was a picture of Bernard Kane and my mother, and they were holding hands, like lovers. "I did not destroy your family," Victor said. "Bernard did." I stared at the photo, every part of me locked in place. It looked old. Mid-90s, maybe. My mother was young, hair tied back, laughing. Bernard was beside her, hand in hers, his smile tight and forced, like he was not used to showing happiness. They were standing in front of a cabin. This cabin. My stomach twisted. "That is not possible," I said. But the image did not lie. Victor stepped back, gave me space, like he knew I needed it. "You were not supposed to see that," he said. "Bernard kept it hidden from everyone, even himself, in a way." I shook my head. "She was married. She was with my dad. He died protecting her." Victor's voice dropped. "He died chasing shadows. He thought I was the threat. He followed Bernard here one night, accused him of everything, called him a traitor, said he knew about the affair, about the money, about you." My knees almost buckled. "What do you mean about me?" Victor looked right at me. "You were not supposed to be raised by the Langstons. You were Bernard's son. He was your biological father." The room spun. I dropped into the nearest chair, the photo still clutched in my hands. I could not breathe. The air felt too heavy, the walls too close. Victor kept talking like the dam had finally broken. Your mother told Bernard she was going to leave with you. But the night she planned to tell your father, everything fell apart. He found the letters. He found the pregnancy test. He snapped. There was a struggle. Your mother was injured, and Bernard ran. That is not what I was told, I said. I know, Victor replied. Bernard changed the story. He turned himself into the rescuer. But really, he was the reason it all fell apart. I could not make sense of it. All my life, I thought I had been saved from a man like Victor. A dangerous, disgraced pastor. A ghost from a childhood I never remembered. But now, that envelope, the secrecy, the inheritance, it was not about revenge. It was about guilt. Bernard had spent his life trying to rewrite history. And this delivery was his way of coming clean. Or maybe, forcing someone else to carry the truth for him. Drew stepped forward, eyes locked on Victor. Why now? He asked. Why say all this now? Victor looked at me. Because if I died with it, the story would stay wrong. And maybe the person who deserved the truth would never hear it. He turned to the mantel, picked up the envelope, and handed it back to me. I cannot keep this, he said. It is not mine. I took it slowly, confused. But Bernard did not trust himself to say it. He wanted you to see what hiding the truth cost a man. He thought giving it to me would be enough. But it never is. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in an old cloth. Another cassette. Identical to the one Mallory gave me. He sent me one too, Victor said. Same tape. Same handwriting. That was when it hit me. The tape was not the end. It was the beginning. The ride back was quiet. Victor gave us directions to an old electronics shop 2 towns over that still transferred cassettes to digital files. It was the kind of place with dusty windows and faded posters of long-gone bands. The guy behind the counter barely blinked when I handed over the tape and asked if he could load it onto a flash drive. Said it would take about an hour. Drew and I killed time at a diner next door. I picked out a plate of cold fries, watching the rain streak the windows. My mind kept circling the same thought over and over. If Bernard was really my father, what was I supposed to do with that? I had hated him for dragging me into this mess. I had hated the secrecy, the manipulation, the bizarre request. But now, it was starting to make sense in the worst way. The man had lived with a secret that broke every part of him. And instead of facing it, he buried it in silence and left me to dig it up. When the flash drive was ready, I took it without a word and walked back to the truck. We drove up to an overlook just outside of Stone Hollow. Mountains in the distance, clouds hanging low like ghosts. Drew plugged the drive into his laptop, turned the screen toward me, and hit play. At first, nothing. Just static. Then I heard it. A voice. Bernard's voice. Rougher than I expected. Worn down by time, by regret. He cleared his throat, and for a moment I could imagine him sitting in a dark room somewhere, alone with his thoughts and this one last confession. Matthew, or Michael? I do not know what name you carry now. Maybe both. My chest tightened. If you are hearing this, it means you did it. You delivered the envelope. Thank you. He paused, like he needed to steady himself. I should have told you the truth a long time ago. About your mother. About who I was. About who you are. But I was a coward. I thought I could erase the damage by controlling the story. I thought, maybe if I gave you a better life, the past would stay buried. His voice cracked. I loved your mother. More than I ever admitted. And I failed her. I failed you. I stared out the window, blinking hard. Your father, Peter Langston, was not a monster. He was a broken man. Hurt by betrayal. Hurt by me. And Victor. Victor was never the villain. He was the only one who tried to keep us honest. I lied to protect myself. And by the time I realized the cost, it was too late. There was a long silence. Then the voice returned. This money, it is not a reward. It is not blood money. It is what I would have left you if I had been the father you deserved. You can take it, or you can walk away. But before you decide, ask yourself one question. The audio popped. Then came the final words. Do you want to be like me? Or do you want to be free? The tape ended. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dashboard, the rain starting to pour harder now. Drew finally asked the question I had been avoiding. So what are you going to do? And for the first time since this whole thing began, I realized something terrifying. I had no idea. That night, I could not sleep. I kept hearing Bernard's voice. That rough, cracking whisper echoing in my head. Do you want to be like me? Or do you want to be free? What did freedom even mean? For most of my life, freedom looked like money. Stability. A chance to stop living paycheck to paycheck, stop worrying if my card would get declined at the grocery store. I thought having enough would finally let me breathe. But now that I was standing on the edge of it, it felt like a trap. Because the truth was, Bernard had never been free. He had lived in a prison made of his own choices. Silence, guilt, half-truths. And in the end, he dragged me into that prison with him, hoping I could somehow let us both out. The envelope was delivered. The tape was played. All that was left was the decision. The next morning, I went for a walk. Stone Hollow was quiet in the early hours. Fog still clung to the sidewalks, and the air smelled like rain-soaked wood and distant pine. I ended up back at Victor's cabin without realizing it. He was outside, feeding birds from a rusted tin pan. He looked up when he saw me. "You listened," he said. Not a question. I nodded. "I do not know what to do," I told him. He gave a small, sad smile. "Most people do not. That is why they keep repeating what broke them." We stood in silence for a long time. Then I asked him the question that had been burning in my chest since the moment I left the lawyer's office. "Why did Bernard choose me to deliver that letter?" Victor looked off toward the trees. "Because he could not face me himself. And because deep down, he wanted you to know the truth, even if he could not say it out loud." I looked at the ground. "He was my father." Victor nodded. "In blood, yes. But that is not the only way someone becomes a father." His words landed heavier than I expected. Because the truth was, I had been raised by no one. My memories of childhood were scattered, stitched together from scraps and old photos. The people who shaped me, teachers, neighbors, friends, parents, they were all shadows. And Bernard? He had stepped in just long enough to leave a scar. So when the transfer paperwork came through later that day, documents authorizing the release of the full inheritance, I did something I did not think I would. I signed it. But not for me. I set up a foundation in my mother's name. One that would fund legal aid for kids stuck in custody fights they did not understand. One that would provide therapy, shelter, options. I took enough to pay off my debts. Nothing more. When the lawyer asked me why I did not want the full payout, I just said, because it was never mine to begin with. That night, as Drew and I packed up the truck to head home, he asked me one last question. "You think he would have approved of what you did?" I stared at the horizon, light breaking through the clouds for the first time in days. "I do not care," I said. This was not about him anymore. But just as we pulled out of town, my phone buzzed. It was a voicemail from a number I did not recognize. I pressed play, and the voice on the other end made my blood go cold. "Matthew, this is not over." The voice on the voicemail was rougher than Bernard's, more urgent, less polished. At first, I thought it was a mistake, another dying echo of the past trying to claw its way into the present. But then the message continued. "I know you delivered the envelope. I know what he told you. But Bernard was not finished. And neither am I." Then there was static. Then a click. I sat there in the truck, phone to my ear, heart thudding like it was trying to punch through my ribs. Drew glanced over, brows raised. "What now?" I did not answer. Not right away. Because I was still trying to place the voice. I had never heard it before, at least not that I remembered. But it had the same cadence as Bernard's. Like someone who had practiced restraint for decades and finally snapped. We made it back to the city later that night. I dropped Drew off, thanked him the only way I knew how, with silence and a tired nod, and drove home. When I got to my apartment, there was a letter waiting for me. No postmark. No return address. Just my name, Matthew Kane. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The paper was creased at the edges, the ink slightly smudged, like it had been written in a hurry or with a trembling hand. I looked at the envelope again. It wasn't in the mailbox. It had been slipped under my door. Someone had been here. And then I read the line that knocked the air out of my chest. I was his son, too. That was it. One line, scrawled in sharp, angry handwriting. And suddenly, it all clicked. Bernard had other secrets, other consequences. I was not the only one he had abandoned, the only one he had lied to, the only one left picking through the wreckage of his life. The voicemail? The letter? They were from a brother I never knew existed. A brother who had found out that I got the money, the name, the keys to the story. And maybe, in his mind, I had stolen the last piece of Bernard that ever belonged to him. For a moment, I felt the panic rising again, like it would all start over. Another chase, another silence, another weight to carry. But then I thought about the foundation, about the kids it would help, about my mother's name being spoken out loud again, not buried, not erased. And I realized something. This did not have to be a cycle. I could respond. I could fight. I could chase ghosts forever. Or I could let it go. I sat down at my kitchen table, turned the letter over, and wrote one line on the back. Didn't break the cycle. I drove out that night and left it in the mailbox where the return address should have been. No name. No threats. Just a choice. The next morning, I checked my account. The money was gone, transferred to the foundation. I had kept barely enough to keep the lights on, buy a used car, and maybe fix the squeaky floorboard in my apartment. And I felt free. Truly free. Bernard's story ended with silence. Mine would not. So here I am now, years later, telling this story. Not because I need pity, and not because I want forgiveness, but because you should know sometimes the hardest thing is not chasing the truth. It is what you do after you finally catch it. What would you have done? Let me know below. And if the story moved you, hit subscribe. I've got more to tell.